The idea alone rewrites the very foundation of Westeros. Ned, the man who never sought power sitting on the Iron Throne, a man defined by honor, restraint, and loyalty, would suddenly find himself holding absolute power in a realm built on betrayal, ambition, and fire. From the very moment Robert Baratheon's death was announced, the realm would fracture, but instead of Joffrey claiming the crown, whispers would surge through lords both north and south. Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, is not merely protector of the realm, he is king of the Seven Kingdoms. The very act of raising a Stark king in King's Landing would ignite loyalty in some hearts and fear in others. The shockwaves would be immediate. The Lannisters, whose claws already dug deep into the capital, would see their power slip like sand through fingers. Cersei's plans to enthrone Joffrey would be shattered if Ned moved decisively, claiming the throne not for power's sake, but to protect the realm from their corruption. Imagine the great lords of Westeros stunned that a northern wolf now sat in a chair forged by southern dragons. Some would call it justice, others blasphemy. The north would roar with pride, yet the south would seethe with suspicion. But the true masterstroke would be Robb Stark's appointment as Warden of the South, the boy who was meant to inherit Winterfell. Instead becomes the Stark who must tame the Reach, the Stormlands, and Dorne, a monumental task for one so young, yet one that would redefine his legacy. This division of power between father and son changes everything. Instead of marching south as the young wolf to avenge his father's death, Robb is given authority in the south, while Ned legitimizes his claim in King's Landing. Robb would not be a rebel king, but a sanctioned power, his word carrying royal. Weight, his armies carrying lawful banners. This means the Riverlords, the Stormlords, even the Tyrells would think twice before defying him. The political map of Westeros would bend under this dual Stark rule. The Iron Throne secured in the hands of Ned, the southern fields and fortresses administered by his heir. Imagine the message this sends. Wolves ruling north and south alike, united under one crown, but the enemies would not sit idle. The Lannisters, humiliated, would strike with fire and gold. Tywin would not allow his grandchildren to be disinherited so easily, nor Cersei's schemes to be undone without blood. Civil war would be inevitable, yet far different from the War of the Five Kings we know. Stannis Baratheon, forever rigid in his claim, would rage at this outcome. In his eyes, Ned was no rightful king, but a usurper like Robert before him. Stannis's war would still ignite, but it would pit not only Baratheon against Lannister, but Baratheon against Stark as well. And yet, unlike in our reality, the North and South would already have unity under Stark authority, a unity Stannis never achieved. Daenerys, across the narrow sea, would awaken to rumors not of a boy King Joffrey, but of a wolf King Ned, and his son commanding armies across Westeros. Her ambitions would shift, her advisors whispering that the North had already broken the wheel by crowning a man of honor, instead of a dynasty of cruelty. Would she see Ned as an enemy to burn, or a potential ally who could stabilize Westeros against the true storm yet to come? The personal consequences would be staggering. Robb, far from Winterfell, would grow into a leader tempered not by rebellion, but by governance. His loyalties would be tested in ways the battlefield never could. Surrounded by southern lords with hidden daggers, his honor would constantly clash with their games. Would he adapt like his father failed to, or would he make the same mistakes, trusting too deeply, too quickly? And what of Ned himself? Could a man who despised lies truly survive in a crown of daggers? The throne demands ruthlessness, yet Ned's every instinct recoils from it. How long before his honor becomes his downfall, not in a dungeon this time, but from the weight of kingship itself? And then, looming in the distance, comes the threat no one in the south wishes to see, the White Walkers. With Ned on the throne, and Robb binding the southern lords to northern authority, perhaps resources would finally be sent to the Wall. Perhaps Jon Snow's warnings would be believed sooner, armies marshaled before the long night descends. Imagine dragons meeting northern steel, not in opposition, but in alliance as the realm, united under the Wolf King, turns its gaze to the true enemy. Or imagine Ned falling as so many kings do, betrayed by those closest to him, leaving Robb isolated in the south, surrounded by vipers, while the north braces for the storm alone. This single divergence, Ned Stark becoming king and Robb serving. As Warden of the South flips every chain of fate we know. Some wars may be averted, others burned hotter. Characters we saw fall might rise, and those who rose might be crushed under wolf claws. But one truth remains certain. The moment a Stark wears the crown, the Game of Thrones itself is rewritten in blood, honor, and the howling of wolves across the realm. If Ned Stark truly became king while Robb ruled as Warden of the South, the first ripple would crash into King's Landing itself. The Red Keep, once a lion's den, would suddenly echo with the footsteps of wolves. Every corridor would feel colder, stricter, bound not by the whims of Cersei or the recklessness of Joffrey, but by Ned's iron sense of order. Imagine the shock on the faces of courtiers who had grown fat on lies, suddenly forced to serve a king who punished corruption instead of rewarding it. The small council would be unrecognizable. Peter Baelish's silver tongue would lose its sway against Ned's piercing distrust. Varys's webs of whispers would meet a wall of northern honor, and Grand Maester Pycelle would tremble as his Lannister. Loyalties cracked under scrutiny. For the first time since Robert's rebellion, the Iron Throne would be in the hands of a man who cared nothing for its power, and that alone would terrify everyone who had clawed for it. But while Ned held the capital, Robb's challenge would be even greater. The South was no easy beast to tame. In the Reach, the Tyrells would test him, probing for weakness, trying to ensnare him with marriage offers and honeyed words. In the Stormlands, the Baratheon brothers, Stannis with his rigid justice, Renly with his charisma, would question why a northern boy had been placed over them. And in Dorne, old wounds from centuries of bloodshed would burn anew, their loyalty hanging by a thread. Every feast, every council, every alliance would be a test of Robb's patience and cunning. He would no longer be the young wolf leading charges on the battlefield, but a diplomat, forced to balance southern pride with northern strength. And every decision he made would ripple back to his father's throne in King's Landing. Of course, the Lannisters would not bow quietly. Tywin Lannister's pride would not allow a Stark crown to endure. His armies would gather at Casterly Rock, his gold flowing into the hands of mercenaries, his envoys whispering promises into the ears of ambitious lords. War would come, swift and brutal. Yet this time the Starks would not march blindly into southern traps. With Ned commanding the capital and Robb rallying the South under lawful authority, the Lions would find themselves cornered from every side. The Riverlands, bound by blood to the Starks, would fall in line. The Vale, still loyal to their Stark kin, might be drawn into the fold. Even the Stormlands could be swayed if Robb played his cards carefully. The War of the Five Kings would never take its true shape. Instead, a war of one king against all those who dared to challenge him would define this era. Yet politics alone would not decide the fate of Westeros. Honor is a fragile weapon in a world built on treachery. Ned's refusal to bend, to scheme, to betray could inspire loyalty, but it could also invite daggers in the dark. The throne has destroyed men stronger than him. Could Ned truly survive the weight of kingship, or would his very nature doom him once again, this time not as a prisoner, but as a king slain by those closest to him? And what of Robb, raised not to inherit a throne, but to guard it? Surrounded by southern courts dripping with intrigue, would he become harder, sharper, more cunning? Or would the lessons of his father repeat in him, dragging both north and south into ruin? But here's where it gets truly insane. While lions and stags fought for scraps of power, the real storm was still marching. Beyond the wall, the dead gathered. With Ned Stark alive as king, perhaps ravens would fly sooner. Perhaps southern armies would be sent north before winter devoured them all. Imagine a united realm, Starks in the capital, wolves in the south, bannermen marching under one banner, standing ready when the long night finally fell. Would this alliance of father and son be enough to save the living? Or would the very divisions they tried to bridge tear apart before the first White Walker ever stepped into the Seven Kingdoms? This is only the beginning of how drastically the game changes when a Stark sits the throne. Every choice Ned makes, every alliance Robb forges, becomes a thread in a tapestry of fire, blood, and ice. Then the First War would erupt, not as the fractured chaos of 5 rival kings, but as a concentrated clash between the wolves and their enemies. Tywin Lannister would move first, summoning his banners from the Westerlands. The old lion, humiliated by Ned's rise, would never allow his grandchildren to be cast aside as mere pawns. He would march not only to reclaim his family's honor, but to seize back the very crown that his daughter had placed on her son's head. Armies of gold and steel would thunder eastward, banners of the lion rippling against the wind. Yet this time, they would not meet scattered rebels or desperate northern hosts. They would face the unified might of a king who ruled both from King's Landing and through his son's authority in the south. Picture it, Ned Stark, no longer a prisoner, but commanding the Iron Throne itself. His decree would carry legitimacy the rebels of our known timeline never had. When he called for the River Lords, they would answer as sworn subjects, not as conspirators. When he summoned the Vale, even a cautious Lysa Arryn would struggle to resist, knowing her niece Sansa now stood as royal kin. And with Robb enforcing order among the southern lords, the wolves would command not just one region, but half the realm. This unity would crush the fragile foundations of Tywin's power, forcing him into a war he could not win alone. But of course, war in Westeros is never just swords and banners. It is whispers, marriages, betrayals, and here lies the true test. Robb Stark, as Warden of the South, would be the most valuable bachelor in the Seven Kingdoms. The Tyrells of Highgarden, always eager to bind themselves to the crown, would push Margaery forward as the perfect southern queen for the Stark dynasty. The Freys, insulted in another life, might beg for inclusion, offering daughters as brides to secure protection. Even the Martells of Dorne, forever bitter about the loss of Elia, could be tempted by a northern alliance that weakened the hated lions. But every offer carries poison. Every marriage promise drags Robb deeper into a web his northern heart may not survive. Meanwhile, Stannis Baratheon would not bend. In his eyes, Ned Stark's claim to the throne was theft, no matter how honorable the man himself. His fiery sense of justice would ignite rebellion against this new Wolf King, and with Melisandre whispering of destiny and fire, he would rally ships and soldiers to his cause. Renly, charismatic and golden, would charm half the Stormlands and, perhaps even the Reach to his banner. Robb, as Warden, would be forced to hold these ambitious men in check, fighting not only battles of swords, but wars of words, promises, and betrayals. And while all this chaos burned far across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen would hear tales of the North rising to power like never before. Not of Joffrey's cruelty, not of a boy king drowning in arrogance, but of Eddard Stark, the honorable wolf wearing the crown. Her advisors would debate furiously. Should the Dragon Queen wage war on a man revered for justice or seek alliance, with him against the true enemy yet to come? Imagine Daenerys arriving in Westeros not as conqueror, but as a rival claimant to a realm already reshaped by wolves. Her dragons would still burn, her followers would still march, but her struggle would be far more uncertain. For in Ned Stark, she would not find a tyrant, but a rival whose honor matched her fire. And here's the chilling truth. No matter how strong Ned's armies, no matter how cunning Robb becomes, the greatest threat is still unseen. Beyond the mire, wall the dead stir. In our reality, the South ignored the warnings until it was nearly too late. But with Ned alive as king, would Jon Snow's words reach southern ears sooner? Would the Watch's pleas be met with soldiers instead of silence? Imagine entire legions marching north under Stark command, southern knights alongside northern bannermen, all preparing before the long night truly began. The balance of survival itself could shift, but even unity has cracks. Every council meeting, every alliance forged, every promise made would drag father and son further apart. Ned, hardened by duty, would cling to honor until his dying breath. Robb, immersed in the southern courts, would learn that survival demands compromise, and compromise demands sacrifice. How long before Robb's choices clash with Ned's ideals? How long before the Kingdom of Wolves tears itself apart from within? And just when Westeros seems to find stability under the Starks, betrayal would strike. It always does. Perhaps a dagger in the Red Keep, perhaps a poisoned goblet at a feast, perhaps a southern lord smiling at Robb's hand while sharpening his knife. For in the Game of Thrones, no man rules forever. especially not one who believes honor can tame the hunger for power. This is where the story turns from victory to tragedy. The wolves may rise higher than ever before, but the higher they climb, the sharper the fall. And so the war drums beat louder, echoing from the Westerlands to the Stormlands, shaking the foundations of the Iron Throne itself. Tywin's armies marched east. Stannis unfurled his fiery banners. Renly's charm drew hosts like moths to flame, and yet the wolves stood at the center, both father and son holding the realm together by tooth and claw. King Ned in the Red Keep ruled with a stern hand, crushing corruption, elevating loyalty and trying desperately to weave honor into a system built on lies. Meanwhile, Robb walked a razor's edge in the south, balancing between honey-tongued Tyrells, ambitious Baratheons and cautious Martells. Every smile hid a threat. Every promise concealed a blade. The first great test came not in battle, but in betrayal. The Reach, long courted by both Baratheon brothers, dangled offers before Robb Stark, Margaery Tyrell as bride, Highgarden's endless grain and gold as dowry. For a moment, the dream of uniting Wolf and Rose seemed inevitable. But Tywin moved. Faster, his envoys whispered into Olenna Tyrell's ear, painting Ned as too rigid, Robb as too northern, the Starks as wolves who would never trust the Reach. Tempted by promises of southern stability, the Tyrells leaned toward Renly, throwing their vast might behind his glittering claim. And just like that, the fragile balance tilted. Robb found himself isolated, forced to fight both with sword and speech to keep his authority intact. Then came Stannis. His fleet darkened the sea like a shadow, sails stretching from Blackwater to Storm's End. Melisandre's red flame burned on every prow, her whispers of prophecy echoing in the ears of hardened knights. But unlike in the timeline we know, King Ned was ready. He had already secured the loyalty of the Riverlords, the Vale and much of the Stormlands through Robb's authority. When Stannis struck, he did not find a fractured kingdom, but a united front, and the Battle of Blackwater unfolded under a different sky. Wildfire still burned, but it was unleashed not by a desperate Tyrion, but by a prepared king who knew the stakes. The sea blazed green, the Baratheon fleet shattered, and for the first time in his life Stannis tasted true defeat. Yet his fire did not die. It smoldered, waiting for another day. But here's where it gets insane. While wolves and lions tore each other apart, far across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen finally rose in fire and blood. Yet instead of hearing of a boy King Joffrey or a fractured realm, her whispers spoke of Eddard Stark, the honorable Wolf King who had taken the throne. Not for himself, but for the people. How does a dragon queen justify conquest against a ruler beloved for justice? How does she rally her followers against a man who would never burn innocents, never crucify children, never betray his word? For the first time, Daenerys' path to power became uncertain, and all the while the true enemy gathered in the frozen silence of the north. Beyond the wall the dead marched. But here the greatest change emerges. With Ned alive and ruling, Jon Snow's warnings would not be ignored. When the Night's Watch sent ravens, armies would be dispatched. When Hardhome burned, fleets would be readied. Imagine entire hosts of Southerners, Knights of the Reach, Stormlanders, Dornish spearmen, marching north at Robb's command, their loyalty bound by royal decree. The long night would not arrive to find Westeros fractured and bleeding. It would find it scarred but united, steel and fire standing shoulder to shoulder. Yet no crown lasts forever. The deeper Ned sank into kingship, the more it consumed him. Honor is a fragile sword, and the Iron Throne corrodes even the sharpest steel. Perhaps he would bend too late, refusing the compromises needed to hold power. Perhaps Robb, forced to lion maneuver among southern snakes, would drift from his father's rigid morality, learning lessons Ned never could. Father and son, wolf and wolf, might find themselves on opposite sides of a single truth. Honor cannot rule a kingdom built on shadows. And when that fracture came, it would not be an enemy that destroyed the wolves but themselves. Still, one haunting question remains. If Ned Stark had been king, if Robb Stark had tamed the South, if the wolves had truly ruled the realm, would Westeros have stood stronger against the Night King? Or would their rise only have delayed the same fate that awaited all men? Fire, ice, and death. This is the turning point. The armies of lions are broken, the Baratheons are scattered, the dragons are rising, and winter itself marches. The fate of the world rests not on who claims the Iron Throne, but on whether the wolves can hold the realm together long enough to face the storm. And now the story surges into its climax, the point where every choice, every betrayal, every fragile alliance collides in fire and blood. By the time Daenerys's dragons cut across the skies of Westeros, the world she lands in is not fractured, but reshaped by wolves. The Iron Throne is not Joffrey's plaything, not Cersei's prize, not Stannis' right. It belongs to Ned Stark, a king whose honor has turned the realm rigid and cold, like steel left too long in the frost. And beside him, Robb Stark rules the South as Warden, a wolf forced to dance among snakes, his once boyish ideals hardened into the cunning of a man raised in the jaws of politics. Daenerys arrives not as savior to a broken land, but as challenger to an honorable king. Imagine the confusion among her followers. How can they burn and conquer in the name of justice, when justice already sits on the throne? Tyrion, if fate still pulls him to her side, would know Ned's nature too well. He would warn her, "You cannot break chains by breaking a man who never forged them." But Daenerys' fire does not listen to reason. She has dragons, armies, destiny, and destiny does not kneel. The clash is inevitable. Dragons roar over the Blackwater, their shadows draping the Red Keep. Wolves brace against fire, stark steel, shining as the city trembles. And here Ned faces the trial he cannot escape. To hold the throne he must abandon honor. To save his people he must sacrifice his soul. Does he strike a deal with the Dragon Queen, risking his crown to unite against the true enemy? Or does he resist and turn King's Landing into a furnace of fire and ice? Meanwhile, Robb faces his own reckoning in the south. Years of diplomacy have made him something his father never was, a wolf willing to bare his teeth in shadow as well as sunlight. Surrounded by Tyrell whispers, Dornish daggers, and Baratheon remnants, he has learned the one truth Ned always despised. Power survives, not through honor, but through fear. And so father and son, though bound by blood, grow apart in spirit. Ned clings to principle, Robb to survival. The kingdom of wolves fractures from within, just as the storm of winter darkens the horizon, and then comes the final terror. The wall falls. White walkers pour south, an endless tide of ice and death. The lords who once squabbled over crowns now stare into the face of extinction. Dragons burn whites by the thousands. Stark armies clash against frozen hordes, and for the first time in history, every house fights as one. Imagine the battlefield. Winterfell's fields glowing with dragonfire, wolf banners torn in the blizzard, southern knights screaming as giants crush them beneath icy fists. The long night arrives not to a shattered realm, but to a realm that, ironically, stood, united at last. And here lies the cruelest twist of all. If Ned lives, if Robb holds the south, if Daenerys descends earlier, Westeros might actually stand a chance. The dead may be pushed back, the Night King shattered by dragonfire and Valyrian steel wielded by armies 10 times stronger than the fractured host we once saw. But victory would not come without cost. Dragons would fall, wolves would die, and, in the end, only one truth would remain. Honor cannot survive winter. Ned Stark may have won the throne, but the very crown he never wanted would consume him. Perhaps he dies in the snows of the north, sword in hand, sacrificing himself not for power but for his people. Perhaps Robb, bloodied and broken, rises as the last Wolf King, harder, colder, and willing to do what his father never could. Or perhaps the Dragon Queen herself seizes what remains, her fire finally the last light against the darkness. But one question still hangs in the icy air. If wolves had ruled instead of lions, if Ned had worn the crown and Robb had mastered the south, would Westeros truly have been saved, or only burned more slowly, under the illusion of honor before winter claimed them all? And here it all breaks apart. King Ned, the wolf who never wanted a crown, now faces the cost of wearing it. His refusal to bend to corruption wins him loyalty from the small folk, but breeds resentment in the lords who thrive on shadows. whispers. Slither through the Red Keep, daggers flash in moonlit corridors, and even allies begin to wonder if Ned's honor is strength or weakness that will doom them all. His crown becomes heavier with each passing day, every judgment pulling him further into the truth he never wished to accept. The Iron Throne does not reward honesty. It devours it. Robb, far in the south, becomes what his father could never be. Surrounded by schemers, tested at every turn, he adapts in ways that scar him. The boy who once marched for vengeance grows into a cold strategist, willing to break vows if it means saving his people. Marriage offers come and go, Tyrell, Martell, even Frey, and each one forces him deeper into compromises his father would have rejected. Slowly the realm begins to whisper of two different wolves, the honorable king in the capital and the pragmatic warden in the south. Father and son, united by blood but divided by vision, begin to walk paths that can only end in collision, and, just when their power seems untouchable, Daenerys strikes. Her dragons tear open the skies, their fire casting long shadows across King's Landing. For the first time, Ned faces an enemy he cannot outmaneuver with honor. Dragonflame does not. Respect law does not bend to oaths. The choice before him is brutal: yield his crown to fire or risk the lives of thousands in a battle he cannot win. Even his sense of justice falters beneath the roar of wings. Yet, in that moment of fire and fear, Robb sees the truth his father cannot. Daenerys is not just a rival, she is the only hope against the dead that march from the north. Winter falls, the wall shatters, and the long night sweeps across the realm. Wolves and dragons, steel and fire, all are forced to stand together or perish. Picture it: Winterfell burning with dragonfire as armies of the dead swarm its walls. Robb leading, southern knights alongside northern bannermen. Ned wielding ice one last time, carving through whites with the strength of a king who never wanted to be one. In that frozen battlefield, honor and ruthlessness finally fight as one. But victory is never clean. Perhaps Ned falls cut down not by betrayal this time, but by the endless tide of death. His last act a sacrifice that saves his people, his legacy etched in fire and snow. Perhaps Robb lives, scarred and hardened, rising as the Wolf King of a realm reborn, no longer bound by his father's rigid honor but shaped by it all the same. Or perhaps Daenerys, with dragons blazing, seizes the crown from both, her fire the last defense against the dark. The question remains: if Ned Stark had been king and Robb Warden of the South, would Westeros have been stronger? Perhaps. Would more lives have been saved? Likely. But in the end, the Game of Thrones always demands its price, and even wolves, no matter how noble or fierce, cannot escape winter forever. And so the last act unfolds beneath skies torn between fire and snow. The wolves who once rose higher than any Stark before them now stand at the edge of extinction. King Ned, older, heavier with the weight of choices, finds himself staring not at lions or stags, but at the endless dead. His honor, once mocked, once cherished, becomes the very thing that binds the realm together, because when winter comes, even the liars and schemers need a man they can trust. Robb rides at his side, no longer as the boy commander of legend, but as the hardened warden who has learned the cruel arithmetic of survival. His banners stretch south and north alike: Stormlanders, Dornish spearmen, Knights of the Reach, and for the first time in history, the South fights in the snow. His men chant "King in the South," not as rebellion, but as recognition of a wolf who commands them with both steel and cunning. Yet every victory exacts a toll. The boy who once smiled at feasts now wears the same grim mask as his father, each decision costing him a piece of himself. And Daenerys, oh Daenerys, flies. Above them, her dragons screaming fire into the blizzard. Once a conqueror, she now becomes the last hope of mankind. Yet the irony is cruel. She sought to break the wheel, but finds herself forced to share it with wolves who will not yield. Her fire sears the dead, but her pride smolders at every council where Ned refuses to kneel, where Robb bargains instead of bending. Allies in war, rivals in peace, dragons and wolves cannot exist without circling each other. The battle for the dawn becomes a vision of chaos and glory. Winterfell's ancient stones crack beneath Dragonflame. Giants collapse into ash. The Night King strides forward, blue eyes fixed on the heart of the realm, and it is here the paths of father and son finally converge. Ned, wounded but unyielding, raises ice one last time. Robb, surrounded but defiant, calls his banners into the storm. Together they carve a path through death, wolves and men howling at the end of the world. But fate is merciless. Ned falls, not to treachery, not to politics, but to the cold he spent his life warning others of. His body collapses in the snow, his crown sinking with him, yet his death becomes legend. The king who never wanted power, giving his last breath. For his people, Robb inherits not only his father's command, but his father's curse. He rises as king, scarred by loss, tempered by duty, ready to carry the realm into whatever future remains. And beside him Daenerys, fire still blazing, realizes at last that perhaps the wheel has broken. Not by her hand alone, but by wolves and dragons, ice and fire, bound in blood and sacrifice. When the long night ends, the world that emerges is not the one anyone dreamed of. The Iron Throne itself may stand, or it may lie in ruins, melted by dragon fire, buried in snow. But the story is no longer about lions or stags, no longer about schemers and crowns. It is about the price of honor, the cost of survival, and the haunting truth that if Ned Stark had worn the crown, Westeros might have stood stronger against winter. Yet it still would have bled, still would have burned, because in the end, every king must fall. The howl of wolves echoes across the Seven Kingdoms, fading into legend, and the question that lingers long after the fires die and the snows melt is not whether Ned Stark could have ruled, but whether anyone ever truly wins the Game of Thrones. And with Ned's fall, the Song of Wolves enters its last verse. The North weeps for the king who never wanted to be one. The South trembles beneath the weight of Robb's new crown, and Daenerys still burns with the fire of destiny. But the realm is no longer the same fractured land she once dreamed of conquering. Wolves now hold the loyalty of North and South alike, bound by sacrifice and united under blood. Robb's rule, however, is not his father's. He does not speak with the same rigid honor. He does not cling to principles that cannot bend. His voice carries steel wrapped in silk, and his enemies learn quickly that the young wolf who once charged blindly into battle has become a king who strikes from the shadows when needed. Lords who plot against him vanish in the night. Rivals who whisper of rebellion find their gold seized, their bannermen broken, their heirs offered to Winterfell as wards. Robb has learned the lessons Ned never could. Honor inspires men, but fear keeps them loyal, and so the realm reshapes itself. The Riverlands are pacified, the Stormlands held in check, Dorne carefully courted. The Tyrells, their hopes of placing Margaery as queen, burned to ash by war and betrayal, withdraw to Highgarden, biding their time. The Lannisters, shattered by defeat, cling desperately to Casterly Rock, their roar reduced to a growl. But even in this new age of wolf dominion, threats remain. Stannis still breathes, his obsession unbroken, his fires burning on Dragonstone. Daenerys still soars, her dragons growing, her claim to the throne undimmed. And the North itself, though proud of its king, feels the bite of winter deeper each day as the true enemy creeps ever closer. Then comes the final storm. The long night stretches across the land, whites swarming, the Night King himself advancing, with an army of silence. But unlike the Westeros we knew, this realm does not face the dark divided. Thousands march under Robb's banners, southern knights, northern clans, Dornish spearmen, Vale riders, all fighting side by side. Daenerys, still unwilling to yield her claim, nonetheless bends her will long enough to unleash her dragons against the tide of death. Fire and ice clash across the frozen north, the dead falling in heaps, the living burning with fury, and at the heart of it all, Robb Stark becomes something his father never was, a king of both honor and ruthlessness, forged in war, sharpened by betrayal, tested in fire. Where Ned's reign was marked by unbending principle, Robb's is defined by survival at any cost. It is this difference that saves them, because when the Night King falls, when the long night breaks, it is not through honor alone, but through sacrifice, strategy, and the unyielding will of a wolf who learned to play the game and win. But Victory carries a shadow. Ned's death remains the ghost that haunts Robb's every decision. Daenerys, though allied in the end, still hungers for the throne, her dragons circling the skies above King's Landing. And the people whisper not of peace but of what comes next. Will the wolves and the dragons remain bound by necessity, or will their alliance shatter once the snow melts? The Game of Thrones, after all, never truly ends. And so the tale closes, where it began, with a question. If Ned Stark had been king, if Robb Stark had ruled the South, could the realm have been saved? Perhaps it was saved, at least from winter's cold hand. But the cost was heavy: blood, fire, and the fading echo of a wolf's howl across the ruins of the Seven Kingdoms. Because in Westeros, even honor cannot outrun the shadow of power. And every crown, no matter who wears it, demands a price in flesh. And so the world left in the wake of the wolves is a realm both saved and scarred. The long night has passed, but it has burned itself into memory. Songs will speak of Ned, the king who never wanted a crown, who gave his life not for thrones, or glory but for the living. His honor, mocked in life, became his legend in death. To the small folk, he is remembered not as a failed schemer or naive lord, but as the King of Winter, the man who stood when all others faltered. Robb's survival marks a different kind of legacy. He does not inspire ballads in the same way. His rule is not sung of as pure or righteous. Instead, his name carries weight like iron. He is remembered as the wolf who kept the realm alive, who learned to wield both truth and deception, who chose survival over ideals. Some call him the savior of the South. Others whisper that he became as ruthless as any Lannister. Yet even his enemies cannot deny, without Robb Stark's cold pragmatism, the world would have frozen forever. Daenerys too leaves her mark. Though fire and wolves fought side by side to push back the night, her hunger for the throne never dies. With the North bled white and the South exhausted from war, her dragons cast a long shadow over King's Landing. The uneasy alliance of wolves and dragons teeters on a knife's edge, and history remembers not harmony but tension, two dynasties circling, bound together by necessity, torn apart by ambition. And what of the realm itself? The Iron Throne, melted by fire or shattered in war, becomes less a seat of power than a symbol of what was lost. No single king can truly unite Westeros after so much blood. Instead, what remains is a fragile balance: North, South, and Dragonfire, each holding sway, each waiting for the other to falter. Peace exists, but it is the peace of a field after battle, littered with scars, silence, and graves. Yet in the quiet that follows, the memory of wolves lingers strongest. Farmers in the riverlands tell tales of a king who rode north into snow and never returned. Knights in the Stormlands speak of Robb's banners holding firm against the dark, and in Winterfell, beneath the heart tree, the whispers of old gods seem louder than ever, carrying the echo of a promise that honor may fall. But it always rises again in the blood of wolves, because in the end this what-if was never about crowns or titles. It was about whether a man of honor could change the fate of a world built on lies. Ned Stark did not live to see the dawn, but his choices ensured it came, and Robb Stark, hardened by fire, carried that dawn into a future no one could have foreseen. The Starks did not simply play the Game of Thrones. For a time they broke it, and that is the story of what might have been had Ned Stark become king while Robb Stark served as Warden of the South, a tale of wolves ruling where lions once roared, of honor tested against fire and ice, and of the eternal truth that in Westeros, winter always comes. Then the First War would erupt, not as the fractured chaos of 5 rival kings, but as a concentrated clash between the wolves and their enemies. Tywin Lannister would move first, summoning his banners from the Westerlands. The old lion, humiliated by Ned's rise, would never allow his grandchildren to be cast aside as mere pawns. He would march not only to reclaim his family's honor, but to seize back the very crown that his daughter had placed on her son's head. Armies of gold and steel would thunder eastward, banners of the lion rippling against the wind. Yet this time, they would not meet scattered rebels or desperate northern hosts. They would face the unified might of a king who ruled both from King's Landing and through his son's authority in the south. Picture it, Ned Stark, no longer a prisoner, but commanding the Iron Throne itself. His decree would carry legitimacy the rebels of our known timeline never had. When he called for the River Lords, they would answer as sworn subjects, not as conspirators. When he summoned the Veil, even a cautious Lysa Arryn would struggle to resist, knowing her niece Sansa now stood as royal kin. And with Robb enforcing order among the Southern Lords, the Wolves would command not just one region, but half the realm. This unity would crush the fragile foundations of Tywin's power, forcing him into a war he could not win alone. But of course, war in Westeros is never just swords and banners. It is whispers, marriages, betrayals, and here lies the true test. Robb Stark, as Warden of the South, would be the most valuable bachelor in the Seven Kingdoms. The Tyrells of Highgarden, always eager to bind themselves to the crown, would push Margaery forward as the perfect southern queen for the Stark dynasty. The Freys, insulted in another life, might beg for inclusion, offering daughters as brides to secure protection. Even the Martells of Dorne, forever bitter about the loss of Elia, could be tempted by a northern alliance that weakened the hated Lions. But every offer carries poison. Every marriage promise drags Robb deeper into a web his northern heart may not survive. Meanwhile, Stannis Baratheon would not bend. In his eyes, Ned Stark's claim to the throne was theft, no matter how honorable the man himself. His fiery sense of justice would ignite rebellion against this new Wolf King, and with Melisandre whispering of destiny and fire, he would rally ships and soldiers to his cause. Renly, charismatic and golden, would charm half the Stormlands and, perhaps even the reach to his banner. Robb, as Warden, would be forced to hold these ambitious men in check, fighting not only battles of swords, but wars of words, promises, and betrayals. And while all this chaos burned far across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen would hear tales of the North rising to power like never before. Not of Joffrey's cruelty, not of a boy king drowning in arrogance, but of Eddard Stark, the honorable wolf wearing the crown. Her advisors would debate furiously. Should the Dragon Queen wage war on a man revered for justice, or seek alliance, with him against the true enemy yet to come? Imagine Daenerys arriving in Westeros not as conqueror, but as a rival claimant to a realm already reshaped by wolves. Her dragons would still burn, her followers would still march, but her struggle would be far more uncertain. For in Ned Stark, she would not find a tyrant, but a rival whose honor matched her fire. And here's the chilling truth. No matter how strong Ned's armies, no matter how cunning Robb becomes, the greatest threat is still unseen. Beyond the mire, wall the dead stir. In our reality, the South ignored the warnings until it was nearly too late. But with Ned alive as king, would Jon Snow's words reach southern ears sooner? Would the Watch's pleas be met with soldiers instead of silence? Imagine entire legions marching north under Stark command, southern knights alongside northern bannermen, all preparing before the long night truly began. The balance of survival itself could shift, but even unity has cracks. Every council meeting, every alliance forged, every promise made would drag father and son further apart. Ned, hardened by duty, would cling to honor until his dying breath. Robb, immersed in the southern courts, would learn that survival demands compromise, and compromise demands sacrifice. How long before Robb's choices clash with Ned's ideals? How long before the Kingdom of Wolves tears itself apart from within? And just when Westeros seems to find stability under the Starks, betrayal would strike. It always does. Perhaps a dagger in the Red Keep, perhaps a poisoned goblet at a feast, perhaps a southern lord smiling at Robb's hand while sharpening his knife. For in the Game of Thrones, no man rules forever, especially not one who believes honor can tame the hunger for power. This is where the story turns from victory to tragedy. The wolves may rise higher than ever before, but the higher they climb, the sharper the fall.